We're now ready to get started with day 2 of the symposium. For our first session of the day, we're pleased to present to you a panel discussion on changing the narrative around women's sport through fiction and culture. We would like to invite the panelists for this session, Ms. Menaka Raman, a former advertising copywriter. She's been a newspaper columnist for over a decade now and enjoys working with nonprofit organizations. She's the author of 9 picture books for children, including Loki Takes Guard, Gappu Can't Dance, Lenin's Guess, and I Love Me. Her short stories have appeared in anthologies published by the Talking Club, Scholastic India, and Penguin UK. We have Ms. Nidhi Gupta, General Manager at Springboard. She's also the author of various children's stories and has extensive experience in helping organizations scale up their operations and expand their user base. In her previous role, she headed the education programs at one of India's premier public policy schools. We have Adita Verghese, skateboarder and founder of Girls Skate India, which is an online community to encourage girls and women to start skateboarding to help the large community of female skateboarders in India. Adita and her friends at the Holy Stoke Collective have helped build over 10 skate parks in different locations in India and 5 abroad. In 2015, Adita and the Girls Skate India team organized India's first all-girls skateboarding tour, covering 4 locations in India. And our moderator for this session is Ms. Karunya Keshav, sports reporter. Karunya graduated from the University of Westminster in London with a master's in international broadcast journalism in 2009, the specialization in online and sports journalism. She's the co-author of The Fire Burns Blue, A History of Women's Cricket in India, and a much-known Equal Here report. Over to you, Karunya.
Thanks so much. We have on this panel today some incredibly creative people who have been doing their own bit to tell stories in really unique ways and using unique platforms, using different mediums. It's not just about the written word. Nidhi's helped us bring together this really unusual audio story on a young girl who wants to play cricket. And I think everyone on this panel here has sort of done their bit in retelling the stories that we usually tell about women. I want to start off with a small story myself, which is the story of something called the Draw a Scientist test. This happened many years ago. It was an experiment done by a researcher called David Chambers back in the 60s and 70s. The results of this came out only in 1983, I think it was. But basically what he did, he asked a bunch of elementary school children to draw a picture of a scientist. And there were about 5,000 children who were involved in this, but nearly all of them drew a picture of a man who was a scientist. Only I think out of these nearly 5,000, there were only 28 pictures drawn of women scientists, and all of those were done by girls. Now, this experiment has been repeated a number of times over the years, and the results have got better. There are, more women drawn here, and there are more boys who are drawing women as well. A couple of years ago, a similar something was done for sports, where some researchers asked girls aged between 8 and 12 to draw a picture of an athlete, to draw a picture of a girl, and to draw a picture of themselves. Now, the girls who took part in, who were athletes, who took part in sports, they tended to draw a picture of a woman athlete. When you ask them to draw a picture of a girl, they drew a picture of a girl as an athlete. When you ask them to draw a picture of themselves, they drew themselves as an athlete. Now, girls who didn't take part in sports ended up drawing pictures of males who were athletes. And I think there's just so much to take away from something like this. But a couple of things that I think are interesting for us today is this implicit bias that exists, and also the power that we have to change it pretty easily. Now, when we talk about narratives, we essentially just mean stories. And we know that stories can be extremely powerful in changing how we see ourselves and how we see the world. Over the past few years, I think there's been a slight change in the kind of stories we tell about female athletes. and women in sport, but we also hear plenty of those old outdated narratives. So to start off with, I want to bring in Atita here, who is the athlete in this on this panel. You've worked with so many girls who are active, who do sports. What do you think these old narratives are that do need changing, and what are the sort of stories that the girls want to tell about themselves? Same question to you guys. You've been doing these stories that use fiction to change these the stories we usually hear about women. What what are these these old narratives that you're aiming to change, and how can fiction do something that, say, sports journalism can't? If Nidhi, you want to first take this?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Karunya. So when we imagine our future selves, we're building on top of the knowledge that we have. And the knowledge that we have comes from what we know, what we read, what we see, what we listen to, what we observe. The old narratives that you talked about are, and which you mentioned, right, that when children drew of the researchers, they thought of mostly men being researchers. The old narratives is that girls can't, it's difficult for girls to play sport. There are lots of entry barriers. That to be an elite athlete, it's mostly men who will find it easy. So fiction can play, fiction is very powerful. It not just reflects the state of the society, but it also has the power to influence society. Fiction has always done that, right? That's the role it also plays. And it influences society by actually causing a shift in social norms. Stories, fiction can show us that what can lie beyond a barrier, the barriers we talk about. And it can just do that by presenting us a reality, a better reality, which doesn't exist in the present. And so it's therefore, important to choose the kind of stories we tell. And again, stories can be interpreted very differently by different audiences. My audience is mostly children, and children are, when they are reading or watching or listening to stories, they're essentially investigating and discovering the world through these stories, right? They are forming their view of the society, which they are going to enter, the possibilities for them through these stories. So it is important to highlight the struggle that women face and overcome. But I think we should also make space for fiction where equality is the norm, where fairness is the norm, right? And children are going to internalize these things. So I think when we make fairness and equality the norm in fiction, children will demand such a world. And Menika has tried to do that with her book as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Nidhi. I think there's, the study that you talked about, Karunya, there's this other piece of research that was done, and it showed that by the time children are as young as 5 years old, they've already formed fairly rigid beliefs and stereotypes about what is and is not possible. And it's actually, a lot of that is influenced by the images and the words that are presented to them. And, that very young period, that age of 0 to 5. And of course, now we have parents reading to their children in the womb. And from that point onwards, picture books at that stage, that it really is, that's really almost their first touch point with the world, with the cultural world outside of them and what exists. So I think in picture books, we have a fantastic opportunity to tell these stories, to present these ideas, to show, and it's, to show young girls and women playing sport, enjoying sport for the sheer joy of it, for the sheer, that wonderful adrenaline rush you get when you're playing a sport, you're out on the field, you're with your mates, having a great time, from doing as, something as simple as that, and all the way to the fact that, yes, these can be your ambitions, they can be your hopes and dreams, and you can make something here, out of your life with sport, and that is an absolutely possible thing. And I agree, you do have, I think, stories about girls playing sports tend to fall into these two kind of buckets almost. The story I have written is about a girl trying to overcome certain barriers and, obstacles placed in her way. And then you have a story where sport is the norm, and it's actually, there's cricket or football, hockey, or whatever it is, one part of the larger story arc happening. And I think both these stories are important because I think it shows young readers of all genders the fact that, yes, you might face barriers, you might face obstacles, but you can overcome them. And it also shows them that, hey, this is also possible. So I think the more diversity, the kinds of stories that we tell, and the kind of images and narratives we kind of present to young readers, I think the better it is for everyone. And not just for them, I think for the grown-ups as well.
Just to pick up from that, it's obviously important that these stories have a message, but how important is it that it's not, preachy, almost like, how do you bring that balance about in your work? Maybe Menaka can start off and then Nidhi can explain as well.
I think there's this, I come very much from a space as a reader and as a writer, that reading is for joy, reading is for pleasure. And any message that we want to give a child, that cannot be the driving force of the book. It has to be a really great story. It has to be, and not always just fun. It can be thought-provoking, it can be serious. All of those kind of hues are possible. But I think when we try to, children are really smart. They pick up on it immediately. When they can smell, a lesson or a lecture or, they can, a moral, they know it's there, right? And I think we should respect their intelligence, and we really, really should avoid trying to do that. I think the best, most engaging books, the books that children really love, are the ones where you're not telling them this is right or this is wrong. You're presenting to them, this is what's happening, and you make them think for themselves, possibly, after they've read the book or as they're reading or when they're talking about their friends and family, that they come to certain, they're thinking about, they're coming to certain kind of ideas and conclusions or thoughts in their mind, or they're still in that journey. But I think that's really what we should be trying to do as storytellers or writers and illustrators, is to say that this is how it is. What do you think about it? And kind of leave them at that point is where I come from, or I try to come from when I'm like.
Right. I think that's really interesting where, on one hand, we're trying to talk about, breaking barriers and all these horrible things that a girl or a woman has to go through to play sport. But on the other hand, it's just about the sheer joy of being on the field and just being able to be who you are. Nidhi, which one of these do you like your stories to be? A bit of both?
Actually, no, I take a very similar approach as Menaka's. My stories are not preachy at all. To me, also as a reader, reading is a release. Reading fiction is a release from reality, right? So I want it to be fun. I want it to be joy, and it can be serious reading. And similarly for children, it has to be joyous. So we try to create very immersive experiences with our audio stories. They're fun and simple stories. There is absolutely no messaging, no hidden, morals in the stories. But children are absorbing a lot when they're listening to what's happening in the story, and they're taking away, their own lessons from it or whatever, what have you. So what I do is I actually normalize characters in my stories, and I just present them, for example, a girl playing a sport as a matter of fact, not as, it being something very difficult or them having a lot of challenges. So I don't want to create the barrier in their minds that when they want to do this, they would have to overcome barriers. So even, for example, we did a story where a mother plays pranks on children, and somebody got back to me and said, really? Can ammas also do this? So, we just normalize what we actually don't think of, typically that this is something that the other sex would do. So yeah, that's my approach as well.
Yeah, I really like that. The point of being subtle, because I obviously do a lot more journalistic writing, and this is something personally I have struggled with as well. Where a couple of days ago there was this picture of Sanya Mirza, the tennis player, that came out, and she was at the post-match press conference at Wimbledon, and she had her little son, just hanging out, next to her, and that was, on one hand, it was such a groundbreaking photo, just this image to see her, act, at that, that level of sport. A part of me wanted to just shout out about it and just tell everyone, hey, look at this woman, how awesome she is, and how, the amazing work that she's doing and the amazing person that she is. And a part of me also wanted to, as you said, just, be like, this is completely normal. There's nothing to watch, move along. And I, I think that is this sort of conflict that keeps coming really often. I don't know if we have Atita back yet. No? All right. Sorry, Atita. Menika, just a little bit about Menaka's story to those that haven't read the book. It's about this little girl called Loki. That's not her real name. That's Menaka, her real name is
Lokanayaki.
Lokanayaki. So there's Lokanayaki, who becomes Loki because and she likes playing cricket. Obviously, no one in her family really is as interested in that as she is. But she wants to join this team near her home, which happens to be just a boys' team, and they're not okay with girls playing anymore. She has this wonderfully supportive coach. She has some wonderful friends who don't really care about cricket, but want to completely support their friend in what she's doing. And the story is about how she goes about this. Menika, I wanted to ask you, how central should this idea of being a girl be to our stories? Because very often we get caught up in these things saying, first female cricketer, first female, tennis player to do this, to have had a child and played at Wimbledon, things like that. Those stories are important because we do want to highlight the fact that, if you can't see what you can't be it. So how central is this femininity of this womanhood to your stories?
Wow. So can I just kind of go back to where the idea for Loki came from? I think this is this was a few years ago, and I was dropping my kids at the bus stand to get their bus to go to school. You have all these kids milling around, and there was this girl, she must have been in 5th grade then, and she'd come up and she had this massive cricket kit, that they all like to wheel behind them. And to that point, in the school my kids go to, and in many of, schools like that, while you'll see a lot of girls playing, there's gender parity in like tennis, swimming, football, table tennis, basketball, all of these sports. Cricket still remains very much a boys' sport. In all other sports, you find a boys' team and a girls' team, but cricket, most schools still have this team. So I asked her and I said, so are you going to start playing cricket at school? She said, yes. And she was so excited. She was just absolutely beaming just at the idea of this. And what didn't go into the story is that, about 10 days later, when I saw her, she didn't have a cricket kit with her. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, I was just completely sidelined. No one made any effort to try and pull me into the game. Or, I was just there. She said, Auntie, it's not like I want special treatment. She was like in 5th grade. So she was very sorted up. She said, I don't want special treatment, but I want to be acknowledged that I am here to play this game with all of you. And I wasn't. So I'll go and figure it somewhere else, So I think that is, to come back to your question, so that's kind of why I wanted to write the story. I think I just found it so interesting. And I kind of wondered, well, what would it have been like for this girl to be the only girl playing on an all-boys team? And from there, the story came. But I think that, when we look at, it's not femininity or womanhood and what those things mean in sport, it kind of plays in a number of ways, right? Women athletes have to be very powerful and they're very strong and they need that to kind of compete. But we also don't like it when they're too masculine. I mean, and you look at the comments that the Williams sisters have gotten over the years, right? And the kind of criticism that's come their way, the things said about them. So we still expect our women athletes to be feminine in a certain way, or womanly in a certain way. But of course, they still have to compete and play for sports and things like that. So I think it's, and when you're growing up, you're also getting a lot of comments about how you look, what will happen, especially in India, what will happen if you play sports in the sun all day long. And, and we also, I think we can't overlook the fact that as girls grow up, there are certain changes that happen in their bodies, right? They grow breasts, they get their periods. All of these things happen. They're all noted, they're all commented upon. They're all used as ways to kind of tell girls to, now you've played this much now let's find something else for you to do that's not, because this is happening to you. So I think I wanted to bring, I get asked by a lot of young girls when they, write to me about the book, they say, but we really want to know, why did you put that bit where Loki gets her periods in this book? Why? Because and I said, because that happens. That happens to young girls. You cross a certain age and you are going to get your periods. These things are going to happen to you. It's a part of life. And, I think I was also very key to say that while this happened, I didn't want to use that as the reason for her not to play sport. So it's just to say, hey, look, this is happening. This has happened to her, but she's still carrying on with what she wants to do. So I think I get where you're coming from. We have to kind of we can't kind of glorify certain aspects and then ignore them when we want. So it's a balance that we need to strike. But for me, with this book, I wanted to show, readers of all genders that, hey, these are things that happen. Let's take it in our stride. Let's, continue doing what we want to do and finding ways to make it happen.
That's, if some of our audience were part of the symposium yesterday, we released a little toolkit for girls as well yesterday. And this was the thinking with a lot of illustrations actually about being able to represent all people, not just girls that look a certain way. But yeah, you do get dark when playing in the sun. You do, you do want to wear comfortable clothes. And I think that is really important. And I think that has come through in your book as well. Just to pick up on some of those things that you said, stereotypes themselves, they can be really useful in telling stories because, your audience already knows this character before you even show it to them. But at the same time, stereotypes are what a lot of us are trying to break. So let me start off with one which we've had a lot of discussions with the Equal Hue team, quite honestly, which is the color pink. So when we started, we did use a fair bit of pink in our name, in our, in some of our graphics. And we did get, questions asking, why pink? It's just such a typically girly color. And if you're trying to, go past these things, why not use something else? But at the same time, this is other discussion that you can have about saying, well, we're trying to just break those previous associations with something as simple as a color like pink. So maybe Nidhi, if I can come to you, pink, yes or no for you?
I would say that I would ignore pink. I mean, yeah, it's there. And I would not talk, so whether you say yes or no, you're acknowledging the existence of a stereotype, right? So there are two kinds of approaches, as you have talked about, that you say yay or you say nay, but you're acknowledging it. There is a third approach, which is what I tend to take, and it's not a cop-out. It's just that the audience that I am talking to is younger children, and children at that age, between 4 and 8, 4 and 10, are very, they're very impressionable during that time. I am actually trying to use very simple, clear narratives about learning things, about trying things, about practicing, something, enjoying a sport without highlighting stereotypes. So there are 3 ways to do it. You say yay pink, or you say why pink, or you just don't even mention pink, right? It's there. It's there. So whoever wants to, notice it will notice it. Others who don't want to will not notice it. In fact, I wanted to draw your attention, Karunya. You mentioned the study that was done in 1980s. Actually, I read about a study, and I think Menika kind of hinted at it. A study that was done in even as early as 2000, as late as 2017. It was called Drawing the Future, and children were asked to draw what they want to become. And even then, the findings reveal that stereotypes exist, and children as young as 7, their aspirations are, shaped by gender-related stereotypes that they're exposed to, and any kind of media that they're exposed to plays a role in creating those stereotypes. So, acknowledging a stereotype also goes in. It is important. I mean, those things have their place, but there is also room for not being, not talking about, just really ignoring it, just disproving the stereotypes by normalizing environments, normalizing facts.
Yeah, I think this is interesting. I think something that has come up is that a lot of these biases, Menika did say it, around 5 years old, but they also get sort of reinforced as they grow older. And in Menaka's story, again, what I found quite interesting is that there were some stereotypes. There were these girls who just wanted to do makeup, and the mum in her story, just wants to watch TV soaps. So what do you do? How do you bring about this balance?
So I think the stereotype, the story that I put in, like the mom. So some of it is drawn from just kind of my own experiences of watching people around me and things like that. But I think I also kind of put them in to make certain points. Like I think that Loki's mom is so obsessed with her TV serials, and she actually sympathizes and empathizes with these completely outlandish characters and their narratives. And that kind of makes Loki think of, but she's like, she gets this woman who's found out that she's adopted and an heiress and all that, but she can't get me, her own daughter, who she lives with. So I think, for me, it was to kind of put that little contrast in place. Then there's the neighbor who's a divorcee, and there's all these, other people in the building who are like, don't go and talk to her, like, divorce is contagious or something like that. But also that was again for Loki to think, but hey, here's someone who everyone is saying is not a good person for a life choice she's made, but she's a really nice person. Here are all these other people living according to certain societal expectations and rules and stuff like that. And maybe they're not so nice and maybe they're not so great. So I just kind of wanted to use some of these stereotypes that we like to hold on to, and that we kind of inadvertently pass on to our children and to others around us, to kind of make some of those points that, all divorced people are not terrible. So I kind of put those in there just to kind of say that, okay, just think for yourself some of these things that you see around you, some of the things. The color pink, I just have an interesting story. So when we first got the, some of the options for the cover for my book came in, and I was looking at them. And of course, I have 2 boys. They're now 13 and 10. So this was about a year and a half ago. And I was looking at them. I was thinking, there's a pink skyline. The back, it's like twilight. So there's like a pinkish yellow sky. I get to think this is too pink. And then I can't remember which one. They said, Rajasthan Royals, their cricket kit is pink. So what are you talking about? So I was like, okay, fine. That's a good point. You're right. So I think like Nidhi said, maybe just don't think about some of those things too much and just go with the flow.
I think a lot of, when we talk about popular culture, a lot of it right now, at least, is being driven in part by ad campaigns, where a lot of companies have realized that, rather than, for example, when they advertise a team's jersey, earlier it used to be the men, the actual athletes, and then models designing women's kits, if there were even women's jerseys available. But I think that, again, is something that's changing a lot in the past couple of years. There have been some incredible campaigns trying to really amplify these various elements of trying to change femininity and women as how we see on the field. But I wonder if in doing this, there's been a bit of a commercialization of the whole narrative. For example, this is something that Nike has been criticized with, because for a while, a lot of their campaigns were around women. They were celebrating these athletes. But then, you had these pregnant athletes who came and said, you gave us a really raw deal. And they've lost a few of their, big names because of this. You have a lot of really big athletes forming their own companies now for things like female wear and all of that. And I mean, we're constantly championing these inspiring stories. What are the limits to these stories? Nidhi, your thoughts on this?
Um, so first on the commercialization of narratives, look, we've uh, we've got to accept that there are some debates, some issues that are taking center stage across platforms worldwide, whether it's equality, whether it's diversity, inclusion. Those are debates that people want to, big brands want to be a part of, right? So they want to associate with these values, and there will be virtue signaling. It's to be expected, right? Also, it kind of, I know what Nike did. They released an ad of them, with pregnant women, whereas they had actually in the past discontinued their engagements with such women. And that's not fair at all. But when they commercialize, let's say diversity or equality, they are at least passing on the message of fairness and inclusion and diversity. I do, to your point about inspiring stories and the limitation of those narratives, again, they have a place of their own, but I feel that they're also limited in the sense that they're not relatable, right? So, and especially for children, right? So if you're only telling them stories, or even young, like teenagers, if you're only telling them stories of protagonists who are, these very inspiring women, to them it's not relatable. It might seem like superhero stories. They might mimic it, they might mime it, but they wouldn't think of themselves, doing those things. So and I think what we want to do is motivate enough children, right? That's the work that you guys are trying to do with Equal Hue. You want to motivate children to take up story, to go out there and play, and girls in particular. And I think for that, you need inspiring stories, but you also need normal stories. You need stories like Loki. You need stories like Amus, which I have done. So I think there's a place for everything, but there are limitations to inspiring stories. In fact, that said, actually, there is a very nice book called Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. And it has now two book series. I've been reading it to my daughter. It's a collection of stories of over 100 women who've achieved great heights in different fields. So there are physicists, there are biologists, there are sports women, there are ballet dancers. And there are stories about their struggle. It's about how these women have, they've helped create a better ecosystem with the work they've done. They've faced hardships, but because of their pursuit, the ripple effect that it has created is that the ecosystem now is better. There is a place for these stories, but I also feel that if our young girls only listen to such stories, it might not motivate them as much as if versus when a story is very relatable. You hear of an everyday character who could be like you, who has parents like you, who's doing things, goes to a school like yours, and they play cricket and they're really enjoying it. They're having fun with their cousins. So I think there is a careful balance that we need to have between inspiring stories and also stories that are where such things are normalized and that are relatable.
Does this mean also showing girls how that it's okay to fail?
Absolutely. And why just girls? I'm showing also boys.
Of course, of course.
Right.
Just speaking a little bit about, Menika mentioned Rajasthan Royals. They had this one really interesting campaign last season, I think, or the season before, where they were sponsored by a sanitary napkin company, right? So they had these conversations with a lot of the male players about menstruation and, how little or how much they knew about it. It as you said, to an extent it was sort of jarring because there were absolutely no women involved in this conversation at all. So I'm like, what more can you do rather than have this conversation? But as Nidhi said, it was just so encouraging that this conversation was had at all on such a massive platform, and the fact that this message got out. So yeah, maybe there was a commercial angle to it, maybe there was a branding angle to it, but maybe that's also okay. I also want to pick up on something that Nidhi mentioned, about telling stories to people, like girls hearing stories about girls like them. Are all these stories today? Do you think they are inclusive enough? Do you think they're representative enough? And like, whose voices are we really getting to hear right now? Menaka, if you want to take this.
There's been so much talk about diversity and inclusion across spaces and children's publishing, especially. I think when we talk about inclusion and diversity in India, I think what are the stories we're telling? Whose stories are being told is one aspect. Who's telling these stories? So I think, and when we talk about inclusion in India, we have to look at linguistic inclusion because we have so many languages spoken in this country. So are we producing books? Are we telling stories in as many languages as children, speak, read, dream, thinking? I think that's really important. Inclusion in terms of gender inclusion, and not just male and female. Inclusion in terms of class, caste, geographic, are we telling stories from enough parts of the country? Are we kind of focusing on just like the metros and places, so there is, inclusion means so much. It is, and it's really, really a broad spectrum. I think we are definitely heading in that direction. I think some of the publishers, children's book publishers in India today are doing some fantastic work in making sure this happens. And you spoke also about, what do these children look like? If we're always showing children in our books who are fair-skinned and rosy-cheeked and lovely long black hair, and that's what all our girls look like, that's really not enough. Children need to see themselves represented. And I think that's one fantastic thing that books do, is that they show you that, yes, here you are, and you're seen here in these books and stories, and you're here. So I think publishers are definitely taking those steps in, whether it's own voices, so ensuring that writers and illustrators from different parts of the country are telling those stories from those parts of the country. In terms of how we're showing, what do these children look like, and is it just kind of representing one? This is what all kids look like, but are we presenting more? So I think it is really, really, really important. I think we're taking those steps in that direction. I think that, as with diversity and inclusion in all spaces, we do definitely have a long way to go.
Nidhi, do you want to come in here?
So I actually also want to point to one of Menika's books, which is very nice. I Love Me is a book that Menika has written, and I actually also, it was one of my first audio stories that I did. I adapted it, and like Menika is saying, inclusion is it's a one word, but with such broad meanings, and inclusion can be on so many different levels. So in Menika's book itself, while it's a short story, you can see the various layers it has for a girl who wants to play and find friends, and in how many ways can one be excluded. But that's such stories are coming out for younger children, and children actually don't realize it when you're telling it to them. If you're just telling it to them without being preachy, right? You're just reading the story, but it's later that they realize it. And I know it because I've told it to my daughter, and she didn't at that time ask me questions that why are they pointing to her eyebrows, or why are they pointing to her long legs? But I know that at some point she did come and say that, oh, Mama, if I grow to be very tall, will I not have, friends to play with? So I think, at least in India, I mean, with Tulika and Kara Details, there are many new kinds of stories in many different, vernaculars really the currency these days, and there are stories being published in many languages. Tulika is doing a great job. So I think inclusion is coming in, at least in a lot of areas, but there is a long way to go. And male voices, where do we represent them? If we are kind of normalizing girls doing certain things, are we also normalizing boys doing things that are thought of as girly, right? I'm not sure that is happening so much, though there are books. Again, I forget what it's called. I Love Ballet. I think there is a book called I Love Ballet, written by Pia Rena, where it shows animals doing ballets, but a dad is also doing ballet dance, and he's wearing a tutu skirt, and mom's also doing it, brothers also doing it. So it takes away this thing of that doing ballet is a girl's thing, right? So I think it's happening, and we just need more of it.
I'm really glad you spoke about, where do the men fit in on all of this? Because I think that is, again, maybe a topic that's got slightly a bit of debate. In journalism, for example, there is this thing that, and broadcasting, that you put in the hours when you do women's sport. So you start off covering women's sport, reporting on it, you're talking about it, and then you graduate to men's sport. This has changed a bit in the past few years, and it is constantly changing. You have people treating, both these systems, both these codes as completely just their job. But I think this is something we've seen in fiction as well. We had Chuck the India to an extent, which is again an incredible story, but it was again this male coach who was being punished because he had to sent to coach the women, or he was used, that was where he would make his name. And I think there was a recent serial, Menaka, you were talking about, where I think it's a Disney serial, where it shows a male coach again being asked to coach the women as punishment.
Yeah, that's right. It's called The Big Shot, and it's got Jonathan Stamos in it, and he's a basketball coach at a big university, and he acts badly off court, during a match or something, and he's sacked, and he's told by his agent, the only job you're going to get now is to coach this girls basketball team at this private school. That's all you're going to get, right? So, and it's clearly like a big step down. So I think those are definitely, those are narratives we need to kind of start working towards changing, and or at least trying to find different narratives to tell around that. And I'm often asked, where do I'm asked a lot, have boys read Loki? And I'm really happy to say, yeah, a lot of boys have read Loki. They've done very lovely book reviews of it and written to me. And I think that itself is though, they also tell me that, when I saw the cover, it's got a girl on it, and there's a bit of pink, so I didn't want to read it, things like that. But then I did, and I liked it. But I think, young boys and men also as allies, I think that's really where I think I see them kind of coming into this space. So can we have, young men playing a sport, and girls want to join, and it's like, yeah, of course you can, and letting them occupy and allowing them to occupy that space, and making sure that that's possible. I think that's definitely something I would like to see happen more, and just more encouragement, and more like, yeah, this is fine, there's no big deal about it, and you should come into this world.
I don't want to spoil the book for readers, but I think that's one of my favorite parts of your book, actually, the little male characters who eventually find different ways to support this girl's dream. I think we can sort of start wrapping up now. So maybe just before we close, if anyone has any questions, please do send them in. But just closing remarks to both of you. As writers, as creative people, what is the idea of women in sport that you hope your audiences take away from your work?
I'd actually like young children who are my main audience, both boys and girls, uh, to go out and play, for the joy of sport. They should feel that playing a sport, in our case, cricket here, is fun and that they can do it. So girls should think that they are as able as boys. Boys should think they are no better than girls. And that's the role that, our storytelling should play in kind of bridging that divide, right? And they should know that there have been women, so girl children, for example, and even boys should know that there have been women who've played a particular sport competitively. And if they want to, they can do it. So if I want the audience to take away one thing, it's that, we can also ignore stereotypes and really just tell stories by normalizing, not highlighting stereotypes, but normalizing it, telling stories as a matter of fact, such that children are motivated to, they relate to it and they're motivated to do it. Yeah, that's what. And yeah, once we release the audiobook, I'd like to tell you a little story that happened right after, we did some artwork with it. But yeah, I'll let Menika do her closing remarks.
Yeah, I think like Nidhi said, just to go out and play. And I know the last year has definitely made that very hard for children everywhere. But I think even before that, I think there's been a real erosion into the amount of time children have to just go out and run around and get sweaty and just have fun. So I think one is to definitely kind of play is important for all of us. I think the other thing I'd like to take away is that, yeah, it might be great. Maybe you have a lot of support, for what you want to do, and that's wonderful if you do. If you do have that, how can you extend the hand of support to others around you who maybe don't have that? And maybe that's for slightly older children, our preteens and teens to think about, is that what can I do? Like I've had this, it's been fine for me. I think for the ones who don't have such a smooth ride, who do have to kind of give reasons as to why I should be allowed to do this, is to stay the course, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, who knows, but to not give up, to not give in to what everyone else around you is telling you to not do. I think that for me is, and that's in sport, and that's really in anything.
Thank you both so much. Nidhi, we'll get back to your story. I think that we'll just take a couple of questions. There's one from Pranav here who asks, how can we change the perception of corporates towards female athletes and encourage them to be more forthcoming? I presume in terms of advertisements or sponsorships, so that, Sana and Sindhu become trendsetters and not exceptions.
I would say that, think of them as athletes and not as women athletes. That's, I think, the first step. And that's not, and that's for the entire, all of us to do, right? Not just corporates. Corporates is made of people like you and me, and, so I think that's one of the first things that I would say. Yeah, Menika, do you have thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm qualified to answer this question, but I think it is the ecosystem also. The more, unfortunately, the more lucrative it is seen to sponsor, women playing sport and women athletes, because there is a viewership for it. It's getting the kind of prime time and airing and coverage in media. I think it's really everything kind of has to work almost together in tandem in a way, or possibly one thing moves ahead. So, sponsorship to say that, look, we're doing this and all of you are lagging behind. You all need to catch up and come to where we are. So it's got to be some kind of a combination of the two.
Just to add a little bit to this, I think in the past year or so, 2 years maybe, there has been an incredible understanding from sponsors and corporates as well, that there's just so much money in women's sport. There's just so much potential. And just this year, even despite the pandemic, we've seen a lot of women's sport cut record-breaking deals. So I think, Pranav, this is happening slowly because they are seeing the results of other people having put in this money. And more people are going to want to be associated with these athletes. It's just a matter of time. I think a lot of the top companies that do research on these things have found that female sports is where a lot of investment is going to go in the next few years.
And I'd add that also organizations like Go Sports Foundation who are doing incredible work in highlighting the stories of such athletes and drawing attention towards them. So that's important as well.
Someone's asking about sports manga, which is popular in East Asia. I'm sorry, I have personally no idea of that. But I mean, I think in general, graphically also these depictions are changing, and I think especially for the books and stories that are being written now, it is happening. Nidhi, maybe this is the perfect segue for you to talk about the artwork for this book and for the audiobook.
Yes, so I also do not have any knowledge about sports manga, so I won't comment on that. But the story that we did for the Equal Hue project, it's called Amu's Summer Holidays. It's about this 7-year-old girl who is, who has summer holidays, who's going to meet her cousins at her grandparents' place. And she's going on a train journey, reads a book about Mithali Raj. She dreams of a match that she's playing, and she's the captain of the team. And I won't say more, but there is a banter between cousins and there's them playing together. But what happened when we actually asked for artwork? So what we normally do is we come up with a story idea, I write it, we record it, and then we ask some children to send us artwork for it. So all our cover art is done by children. We only give them a brief of the story. We don't tell them the entire story because we are actually very deliberate, even when we tell the story, to let children's imagination soar, right? So we let them listen to things and leave it to their imagination. And we really do it by using vivid descriptions, by sound effects, and very evocative imagery, and sounds that stick in children's minds. And this is exactly what we have tried to do with this story. So when we sent out the brief for this story to, and we opened it up to a lot of children, one of my friend's daughter, she sent in her artwork, and there was only a little bit about the story, like literally 5, 6 sentences. The day after that, my friend messaged me saying that, what happened? She came to me and she asked me, because this girl didn't know about cricket because that's not what, she's been exposed to at all. So then she did submit a drawing though. And then she asked her mama that, Mama, what is cricket like? Is it like golf then? Because her dad plays golf. Do you play it? Is there what kind of ball is there, etc. And then after a few hours, she said, would you buy me a bat, a cricket bat? Can I also play cricket? And it doesn't matter whether she asked for a blue bat or a pink bat, right? As long as she asked for it. And that's really a testimony to what we are trying to do. Just get people, children interested to play.
Thanks so much, both of you, for joining. Atita, she couldn't be, had some technology issues today, but please do go take a look at her Instagram page that she runs. It's called Girl Skate India. It has these wonderful images of girls who are doing pretty cool things. So please go take a look at that. And now over to you, Gita.
Thanks, Karunya. Thank you to the whole panel for that extremely engaging conversation.